The emergency stairwell door on the 14th floor of Meridian Medical Center didn't burst open so much as cease to exist. Grigor Koval, 6 feet 4 inches of former Spetsnaz muscle and controlled pharmaceutical rage, stepped through the buckled frame like a man walking through a beaded curtain, and in the space of 7 seconds, the most exclusive patient floor in the city became something else entirely. Something that smelled like metal and fear. Quinn Mercer was 20 feet away when it happened. She had been pushing a medication cart down the corridor, the wheels catching on the same seam in the tile they always caught on near room 1407 when the sound hit her. Not the impact. She'd heard impacts before, in places with sand and heat and no corridors this clean. The sound she heard was the silence immediately after. The specific silence of people realizing the world had just changed. She stopped pushing the cart. She had been a night shift floor nurse at Meridian for 5 months and 3 weeks. Long enough to know every patient on the 14th floor by condition, medication schedule, and room number. Long enough to memorize the blind spots in the security cameras. Long enough to walk this hallway in complete darkness and never knock over a single IV pole. She had not been here long enough for anyone important to know her name. That was the point. 40 minutes before the stairwell door stopped existing, Quinn had been standing at the foot of bed 1401, with a blood pressure cuff in one hand and a bruised kind of patience that had been in development for years. Richard Davenport didn't look like the kind of man who controlled a pharmaceutical empire worth $42 billion. He looked like what he was, 61 years old, post-op from an elective knee replacement, irritated at the specific quality of his irritation, wearing a hospital gown that cost more than Quinn's first car. "I asked for the saline flush an hour ago," he said, not looking up from his phone. His reading glasses were perched at the end of his nose. The phone case was crocodile leather. "Is that a complicated request?" "No, Mr. Davenport, I have it right here." "You're new." 5 months, Quinn said. He looked up then, the way men like him looked at service staff. A scan, not a recognition. The kind of look that measured a person for what they could provide, found the number acceptable, and moved on. "The night nurse I usually have, the tall one. Where is she?" "Transferred to day shift last week, sir." Of course she was. He went back to his phone. "The pillow on the left side needs adjusting. And tell whoever's responsible for temperature control on this floor that it's running 2 degrees cold. I had them install a separate thermostat for this room specifically." Quinn moved to adjust the pillow. Her hands were steady. They were always steady. She had learned to keep them steady a long time ago, in circumstances that had nothing to do with pillows or thermostats. The steadiness had cost her something she didn't like to think about at 2:47 in the morning, but it kept her employed on the night shift, which paid $19 more per hour than days, which was why she was here and not somewhere easier. Addie's medication ran $1,400 a month. Insurance covered $600. Quinn's hand stayed steady. "Is there anything else you need tonight, Mr. Davenport?" He waved a hand, the kind of dismissal that wasn't rude exactly, just precise in its indifference. She was furniture that talked. Useful furniture, but furniture. "Just the temperature. And tell them to do something about the noise from the elevator bank. I can hear the cables." "Of course." Quinn backed toward the door. Her foot caught the corner of the medication cart. She'd been doing that more often lately, deliberately, letting small clumsiness accumulate into a pattern, and the cart rolled sideways with a soft metallic rattle that was louder than she intended. Davenport looked up. "Sorry," Quinn said, steadying the cart with one hand. "I'll get that out of your way." He watched her for a moment with the expression she'd seen on a dozen faces in a dozen different rooms over the years. Not anger. Something quieter than anger. Dismissal. "You might want to consider the day shift," he said, and looked back at his phone. Quinn got the cart into the corridor and let the door fall shut behind her. She stood there for a moment in the fluorescent quiet of the 14th floor hallway. She thought about Addie's last lab results. She thought about the refill she'd picked up on Tuesday, how she'd count out the pills on the kitchen counter and done the math again the way she always did. Month to month, bottle to bottle, calculating how far the money would stretch before it stopped. The medication that kept her sister's immune system functional was manufactured by a company called Davenport Biosciences, owned entirely by the man who had just told her to consider the day shift. Quinn pushed the cart toward the nursing station and did not allow herself to feel anything about that particular irony. She'd had years of practice. She was 6 steps from the nursing station when Grigor Koval came through the door. The security desk at the end of the corridor had 2 guards on night shift, Pavel, a former corrections officer who was good at crossword puzzles and bad at paying attention, and Diane, who was neither former anything nor bad at paying attention, and who had her hand on her radio before the door had finished falling. It didn't matter. Grigor crossed the distance between the door and the desk in the time it took Pavel to stand up. His left forearm caught Pavel across the collarbone and drove him back into the wall, with a crack Quinn heard from 30 feet away. Pavel hit the corner of the desk on the way down and didn't get up. Diane got the radio to her ear. She even got one word out, 14 we have, before Grigor's hand closed around the device and the hand holding it, and she made a sound like compressed air releasing and collapsed. He set her down. Not through, set. Quinn noticed that. He didn't want her dead. He was managing the body count. That told her several things, and none of them were good. Grigor straightened and looked down the corridor. His eyes found room 1401 the way a compass finds north. Immediately, without searching, he'd done his homework. Someone had given him the room number, the floor plan, maybe even the shift schedule. He started walking. Quinn didn't run. She moved the medication cart to the left side of the corridor, deliberate and quiet, positioning it where it would create a specific problem for a specific person in approximately 45 seconds. Then she reached up and pulled the elastic band from her hair, which she wore in a tight knot at the base of her neck. It fell to her shoulders. Her hands were still steady. The man at the nurse's station across the hall, Terence, third-year nursing student, covering the desk while the charge nurse was on break, stood up from behind the counter with his mouth open and his phone in his hand. "Call a code gray," Quinn said, her voice flat and even. "Right now. Then get into the supply closet and lock the door from the inside, and don't open it for any reason until you hear police voices. Do you understand?" Terence stared at her. "Terence, code gray, closet now." He moved. Quinn turned to face the corridor. Grigor had stopped walking. He was looking at her the way she'd seen men look at her before, in different corridors, different countries, different circumstances, the rapid assessment that ended in dismissal. A nurse, a woman, an obstacle measured in seconds. "Move," he said. His English was careful, accented, the consonants placed like furniture being rearranged. "I can't do that," Quinn said. He covered the distance between them in 4 strides, which was faster than most people expected, and reached for her the way you reach for a door handle, automatic, unthinking, certain of the outcome. Quinn was no longer where she'd been standing. She moved at his angle of approach instead of away from it, inside his reach before his hand could close, and drove the heel of her palm upward into the soft tissue just below his sternum. Not hard enough to rupture anything. Hard enough to interrupt the breathing cycle and the confident forward momentum of a man who hadn't expected the door handle to not be there. Grigor stumbled. "Not much, but enough." "Before you decide how to proceed," Quinn said, stepping back to give herself room, her feet finding the stance that lived in her muscle memory like a language she'd learned before she learned English. "You should know that what you just felt was me being careful. I don't want to hurt you. I want you to make a different decision." He looked at her. Really looked, this time. "Last chance," she said. "Walk away." He charged. If you're watching from somewhere new tonight, drop your city in the comments below. I'd love to know where you all are tuning in from. What happened next lasted 40 seconds and would have been impossible to explain to anyone who hadn't been trained to see it. Quinn moved the way water moves around a rock, not resistance, but redirection, using Grigor's size and momentum as variables rather than threats. His first swing took out the medication cart she'd positioned in exactly the right place, sending a tray of saline bags across the floor. His second went over her head as she dropped beneath it and came back up inside his guard. She broke 2 of his fingers on his knife hand. She hit the nerve cluster behind his left knee and felt it buckle. She did not hit his throat, because she needed him breathing for the conversation that would happen later, with people who carried badges. He went down to one knee, and for 5 full seconds the only sound on the 14th floor was the distant electronic hum of the elevator and Grigor's ragged, disbelieving breath. Then the stairwell door opened again. 4 of them, black tactical gear, suppressed weapons, face shields. They came in pairs and moved in practiced formation, the laser sights painting small red points across the corridor walls that drifted and searched, and then found Quinn with the patient certainty of professionals who were very good at their jobs. She raised her hands, not because she was surrendering, because she was counting. 4 entry points visible, unknown coverage on the exterior, Grigor still functional, which made him still a factor. Davenport's room 30 feet behind her, Terence locked in the supply closet, the charge nurse still somewhere on her break, which was a mercy. "Quinn Mercer," said a voice from the formation, male, flat, the kind of voice that had done this before. "We're not here for the patient." She said nothing. "We're here for you. Come quietly," and Mr. Davenport walks away from this with a very interesting story to tell at dinner parties. The red dots on the walls multiplied. She had been quiet for 5 months and 3 weeks. She had been quiet for years before that, in the operational sense, contained, careful, controlled. She had built a life out of quiet the way some people build houses, one careful brick at a time, and she had done it for Addie, because Addie needed someone who wasn't going to disappear into the kind of work that disappeared people. The door to room 1401 opened. Richard Davenport stood in the doorway in his hospital gown, holding an ivy pole like a man who had never held anything for self-defense, but was committing to it anyway. He was pale, his knee clearly hurt. He was still standing up. "Hey," he said. His voice was less certain than usual, but it was there. "Whatever this is, she's my nurse. You want to get through her, you go through me first." One of the tactical operatives made an adjustment that might have been a laugh suppressed. Quinn did not allow herself to feel moved by this. She was too busy doing math. The supply closet where Terence was hiding shared a wall with the medication room. The medication room had a service exit that opened onto a secondary stairwell. The one that wasn't covered, because whoever had planned this operation had pulled the floor plans from the hospital's public records filing, and those records were 2 renovations out of date. She had noticed that 3 months ago. She had filed it away the way she filed everything, quietly, without comment, in the part of her mind that was still, always, doing the job she'd been trained for. "Mr. Davenport," Quinn said, her voice even, "I need you to get back in your room and get onto the floor between the bed and the wall." "I'm not going to." "Now, please. Between the bed and the wall. You'll understand in about 90 seconds. Something in her voice reached him, the particular frequency that had nothing to do with the words and everything to do with the certainty underneath them. He looked at her face. Then he went back into his room. Quinn hit the corridor lights. She moved through the darkness the way she'd moved through darker places, the floor plan written in her feet, the supply closet, the medication room, the service exit, the secondary stairwell. Each door opened on the first try because she'd memorized which ones stuck and which ones didn't. Behind her she heard shouting, the professional kind, clipped and tactical, night vision powering up, Grigor's voice, guttural and directing. She was already 3 flights down when they reached the medication room. The secondary stairwell opened into the hospital's lower service level. Laundry, kitchen, the kind of infrastructure that never appeared in the promotional materials. Quinn moved through the industrial white corridors at a controlled run and found the electrical junction panel she'd identified 2 months ago during a facilities tour she'd requested for reasons she'd described as professional curiosity. She found the circuit breaker for the 14th floor in the dark by touch. Through it. Then she called 911 from a wall-mounted landline, gave the address and floor number and a description of the tactical team's weapons and formation, and hung up. She stood in the hum of the service level and let herself breathe. Her hands were shaking now. That was fine. They always shook afterward. The steadiness during was the thing she'd trained. The shaking after was just the body settling its accounts. She thought about Addie's voice on the phone 2 days ago, reporting that the latest blood work had come back clean. The cleanest yet, Quinn. Dr. Kapoor said the dosage is actually working. The particular way that particular piece of news had moved through Quinn's chest like something unfolding. Addie didn't know what her medication cost. Quinn had never told her. She'd never told her a lot of things. The footsteps on the stairs above her were precise and unhurried. One person, not tactical. She turned. Davenport was standing at the bottom of the stairwell in his hospital gown, with the IV pole still in his hand and his surgical knee, at the absolute limit of what was reasonable to ask of a joint that had been operated on 48 hours ago. His face was a specific shade of pale that Quinn recognized as controlled adrenaline. He'd walked 3 flights of stairs on a post-surgical knee. "I told you to stay on the floor," Quinn said. "I know." He looked at her for a moment. "The maintenance worker on 12 told me where the stairs lead. I told him there was an emergency." A pause. "There was an emergency." There was. Quinn checked the stairwell door above him, no sounds yet. "Who are you really?" he asked. She had been asked that question before, in rooms cleaner than this one, and in rooms considerably less clean. "Right now I'm your night nurse," she said. Before that. She looked at him, the man whose company's pricing structures had rebuilt Quinn's entire life around a single monthly number for 3 years. The man who had looked at her 40 minutes ago and seen furniture. Before that, she said carefully, I worked for an organization building a case against a distribution network supplying counterfeit pharmaceuticals into 3 eastern states. I've been here 5 months gathering evidence connecting that network to someone on your board of directors. The color that left Davenport's face was specific, recognition color. Who? He asked quietly. I'll get there. The team upstairs wasn't sent for you. They were sent for me. Someone on your board burned my cover. They knew that if they staged an attack on your floor, I'd have to surface to stop it. She checked the door again. I walked right into it. Davenport leaned against the wall. His knee was visibly swelling against the fabric of the gown. The counterfeit product, he said slowly. We've been tracking a quality deviation in the eastern distribution chain for 8 months. Our internal team said it was a fulfillment error. It's not a fulfillment error. Quinn's voice stayed level. Someone on your distribution board has been substituting diluted product for 2 specific medications. One of them is an immunosuppressant. The word sat between them in the fluorescent quiet. Davenport's expression changed. I have a sister, Quinn said, and she hadn't planned to say it, but the service corridor at 3:40 in the morning after someone had tried to have you killed was apparently the kind of place where things you hadn't planned said themselves. She's been on that medication for 3 years. Her last labs came back the cleanest they've been since her diagnosis. A breath. The real product works. Whatever your distribution contact decided was an acceptable substitute doesn't. And my sister is not the only patient in 3 states who's been taking it. The sound of sirens was audible now, distant but multiplying fast. Davenport was quiet for a long moment. Tell me the name, he said, the board member. The FBI will have everything I've documented when I hand over the drive tomorrow morning. They'll get to you through proper channels. Quinn moved toward the service exit door. And you, he asked. I wasn't here. She had her hand on the door. The medication, Davenport, your sister's. I want the name and the dosage. Quinn stopped. The cost, he said. His voice was different now, stripped of the thing that made it sound like a man who owned rooms. Whatever you've been paying out of pocket, I want that corrected. She turned and looked at him. Really looked. The way you look at someone when you're trying to understand whether they mean what they're saying or whether they mean what they think they're saying, which are not always the same thing. That's not why I stayed, she said. I didn't stay tonight because she's on your product. I know, he met her eyes. That's exactly why I'm asking. The sirens were close now. Quinn gave him the name, the dosage. The pharmacy on the east side of the city where Addie filled the prescription every month, on a block where the buildings were the same age as the people who lived in them, and the pharmacist knew his customers by name. Then she went through the door. She was 4 blocks away when the last of the adrenaline finished settling. The city was doing what cities do at 4 in the morning, running at its lowest register, garbage trucks and early taxis, and the particular quality of streetlight that only exists before dawn. She walked without hurrying through it, her scrubs the same color as hospital workers heading to early shifts, her face turned toward the street. She thought about calling Addie. She didn't. It was too early. Addie slept deeply and woke slowly and didn't need to be pulled out of either by a phone call from her sister on a Tuesday at 4 a.m. There would be time. She hoped there would be time. 3 weeks later, Quinn Mercer stopped existing. A new name, a new city, a new hospital. Night shift, different floor plan, same elevator cable noise, same tile seam that caught the medication cart in the same spot. The work was the same. The reasons were the same. Addie's next round of labs came back the cleanest they'd been in 2 years. At Meridian Medical Center, the property department catalogued and filed a single item found near the service stairwell. A hospital ID badge, the lanyard cut clean, the clip still attached to a badge reel worn down to bare metal from months of use. The photo showed a woman with dark eyes and hair pulled back so tight it gave her a look of permanent watchfulness. The name read, Mercer, Q, Night Shift, Floor 14. In his home in Connecticut, recovering the rest of the way from his knee surgery, Richard Davenport sat in a room that smelled of old books and called an emergency board meeting for the following morning. He had spent most of the previous 2 weeks on the phone with the FBI. He had not told anyone why. He was still looking for the right way to explain what it felt like to be shown mercy by someone who owed him none, to be saved by a woman who had every reason to walk away and had stayed anyway, at cost to herself, For a man who had looked at her and seen furniture. He didn't have the language for it yet, but he was beginning to think he needed to find it. Because the woman who had walked out through the service exit at 4 a.m. had left something behind that had nothing to do with the badge or the evidence drive or the distribution network she'd spent 5 months building a case against. She had left him a question he didn't know how to stop turning over. If she could protect a stranger at cost to herself, a stranger who had never once learned her name, who had told her to consider the day shift, who had given her not a single reason to stay, then what, exactly, had he been doing with $42 billion? He didn't have the answer. But for the first time in a very long time, Richard Davenport thought that not having the answer might be the right place to start.